She was just a little girl, in the snow, eyes wide with grief, clutching her sister's hand and whispering the words that would stop any man in his tracks. "Our mama just died. Can we stay one day?" But what began as a single day turned into something neither of them expected, a journey of healing, unexpected love, and the kind of forever that only a broken-hearted rancher could offer. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about how the right knock on the door can change everything. Now, let's begin. This is the story of a single dad and the two little stars who found their forever. The snow whispered across the road like it was carrying secrets, wrapping the quiet world in a hush too deep for voices. It drifted gently across the weathered boots of Wes Dalton, who stood alone in the center of an empty county road, his breath rising slow and steady into the brittle air. He had taken this route into town hundreds of times, but that morning something stopped him cold. Two little girls stood in the snow just ahead. They looked like mirrors, barely 6 years old. Same tangled chestnut hair, same oversized gray dresses layered over wool tights, too thin for the cold. Their boots didn't match, and one of them wasn't even wearing hers. She held them slung over her shoulder by the laces, as if unsure whether to keep walking or give up altogether. The other clutched a tattered stuffed puppy to her chest, its head lolling sideways, one ear missing. They didn't cry. They didn't move. Wes's horse gave a low, restless breath behind him, hooves shuffling against the gravel road. He stayed still, watching. Every instinct told him to keep walking, keep his head down, don't get involved. But their eyes stopped him. Big, brown, watchful, too old for their faces. He knelt, slowly lowering himself to their eye level. "Where's your folks?" he asked, voice low but not unfriendly. The girl without the shoes looked at him dead on. "Our mama died today." The words landed like a stone in still water. Wes's throat tightened. He looked between the two of them, waiting for something more. A sign, a suitcase, a car coming down the road behind them. Anything that said someone else was responsible here. Nothing came. The second girl stepped closer. Her voice was softer. "We were on the train. The conductor told us to get off here. He said someone might come." Might. That word hit him harder than it should have. Wes rubbed the back of his neck, snow gathering on the brim of his weather-beaten hat. "You got names." "I'm Hetty," said the first. She tilted her chin up. "She's Hattie. We're twins." He nodded as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. They didn't look scared. They looked tired. The kind of tired no child should ever wear. Hattie took a cautious step forward. "Can we stay with you just one day?" The way she said it, not desperate, not pleading, just plain, made the air around them feel heavier than snow. Wes didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, walked back to his wagon, and unwrapped the sandwich he'd packed, but hadn't touched. Turkey. Still cool from the morning. He returned and held it out in both hands. Neither girl moved. "It's not poisoned," he said gently. Hetty took it first. She handed half to her sister without a word. Then they both sat right there in the snow and started eating, as if the decision had already been made. Wes watched them for a long moment, something shifting in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not since Mabel had walked out that door and never looked back. Not since the nursery stayed empty. Not since he'd stopped wondering what it might be like to hear little footsteps in the hall. He turned back toward the wagon. "Well," he said. One day, the twins followed silent as shadows. They climbed the wooden step like they'd done it before, like the motion was familiar, as if they'd been climbing toward hope all their lives. He handed them an old horse blanket. Hetty wrapped it around Hattie first, before pulling it over her own knees. Wes sat beside them, his hand steady on the reins, though something inside was trembling. Not fear, not quite, something softer, something dangerous. As the wagon pulled forward, the snow thickened around them, muffling the world like cotton. They passed bare trees, crooked fences, the hollow shells of old barns, all dusted with winter's indifference. No one spoke, but every few seconds Wes glanced sideways, just to make sure they were still there. When they reached the ranch, the gate dragged along the dirt, moaning like it hadn't been opened for anyone new in a long time. The land stretched out wide, framed by frostbitten fences, and a house that leaned slightly weathered by time, but still standing like its owner. The twins stared up at the porch with quiet eyes. "This ain't much," Wes muttered. "But it's warm." They said nothing. He led them inside. The house was simple, one main room with a fireplace, a kitchen that looked like it belonged to a man who didn't cook, and a staircase that creaked when you looked at it too hard. The dog, old Bramble, limped out from under the table and sniffed the air. He wagged once, then ambled over to Hattie, who reached out and touched his crooked ear. The dog laid down beside her, as if it had always been that way. "You girls can sleep by the fire tonight," Wes said, pulling out extra blankets from the chest. "Just for tonight." Hetty nodded. "We don't need much." He hesitated, then went upstairs and left the door cracked. From the window, he watched them, two small figures on the rug tucked in beside each other, one holding a stuffed dog, the other holding the real one. He told himself it was just one day. But something in the silence downstairs felt different now, not empty. Just waiting. The morning came grey and still, as if the world had paused overnight just to consider what had happened. A faint glow filtered through the frost-coated window panes of Wes Dalton's house, casting pale rectangles of light onto the hardwood floor. The old grandfather clock hadn't ticked in months, but the silence held its own rhythm. Wes stood awake in the upstairs room, stiff from a night spent half sleeping and half listening. Somewhere deep in the night he had heard the floor creak, the dog grunt, a cough muffled beneath layers of wool. It was strange the way those small sounds could echo in the chest, like they belonged there all along and had only just returned. Downstairs he found them curled up on the rug in front of the fireplace, just as he had left them. Hetty was already awake, watching the flames, with the same wary focus she had given him the day before. Hattie still slapped her hand, resting lightly on the stuffed puppy. "Morning," Wes said, clearing his throat. Hetty nodded, but didn't speak. He noticed she had her boots beside her now, still tied together by the laces still not worn. Maybe she didn't know if they were meant for going or staying. He poured milk into 2 tin cups and warmed up some cornbread from the night before. They sat on the floor while he stayed at the table, unsure how to cross the space between them. When Hattie woke, she accepted the milk without hesitation, her eyes still cloudy with sleep. "You girls hungry?" he asked. "I guess," Hetty said. Hattie whispered, "It's warm here." Wes looked down at the mug in his hands. "Yeah," he muttered. "Not much else, but it's warm." After breakfast, the girls wandered to the window. Hetty pressed her fingertips against the cold glass, while Hattie studied a faded photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. "That your wife Hattie?" asked, voice barely audible. Wes didn't turn. "Used to be. Her name was Mabel. She gone too." "Yeah, been a while now." There was no need to explain more. Kids who had learned silence understood grief without it needing to be dressed in words. The girls didn't ask any more questions, but Hetty lingered near the photo a moment longer. Then she drifted toward the fireplace again, picked up a stub of charcoal from beside the stove, and walked over to the far wall. Wes watched, uncertain what she was doing. She crouched down and began to draw. It wasn't much, just 2 sets of boots, one large, one small, side by side, crooked lines, unsteady pressure. But there was something alive in it, something honest. When she finished, she stood up and faced him. "You got a nail." He blinked. "What for?" "So I can hang it." He hesitated, then walked to the workshop bench along the kitchen wall, fished out a rusted tack, and handed it to her. She climbed onto the bench seat and pressed the paper flat beside the window. He handed her the hammer. She tapped twice carefully, then stepped back. "There," she said. Wes stared at the drawing. It didn't look like much, but it filled the room in a way he hadn't felt since Mabel left. "She likes drawing things," Hattie explained. "She drew Mama before she got sick." Then she stopped for a while. Hetty said nothing, but her chin lifted a notch, as if the drawing was her way of saying, "I'm still here." Later that afternoon, the girls followed Wes out to the barn. Bramble the dog limped behind Happy for the company. Wes showed them the chickens, the hay bales, the creaky saddle that hadn't seen a rider in weeks. "You girls ever feed chickens?" he asked. "Nope," Hetty said, but she was already picking up a tin bucket. "They peck?" Hattie asked nervously. "Sometimes. Don't take it personal." By the time they returned to the house, both girls were dusty, wind-chapped and grinning. Hattie had a small scratch on her wrist. Hetty had hay in her hair. Wes didn't say it, but the sight of them moving, laughing, alive, pulled something long dormant awake in his chest. As evening fell, the air turned colder, and the snow began again. Wes lit the fire earlier than usual. The girls helped gather kindling. He made them stew from canned vegetables and jerky. It wasn't gourmet, but they cleaned the bowls. "Can we sleep here again?" Hattie asked, pointing to the hearth. Wes paused, then nodded. "Yeah, for tonight." After they curled beneath the blankets, he climbed the stairs. But this time, he didn't close the door. He sat by the window, coffee untouched in his hand. The wind howled softly outside. Downstairs, a faint whisper rose through the floorboards. "You think he'll make us leave? I don't know," Hetty answered. "But I think maybe he remembers what it's like to be left." "Yeah." There was silence. Then Hattie said, "I like his quiet." Wes exhaled slowly and closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight they were still here. And the house didn't feel empty anymore. The wagon creaked along the rutted road, its wheels cutting soft tracks through the snow-blanketed earth. The wind had eased that morning, but the sky hung low and pale, like it hadn't quite decided whether to hold its peace or weep. Wes held the reins loosely in his gloved hands, his eyes fixed ahead. Beside him, Hetty and Hattie sat quietly under the horse blanket, pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning the town in the distance, like it was a place they weren't sure they were allowed to enter. "Don't talk, unless you have to," Wes murmured. "People'll look. Doesn't mean anything. Just let 'em." Hattie nodded. Hetty said nothing. It had been 3 days, 3 quiet mornings, 3 nights by the fire, 3 bowls of stew scraped clean. No one had come looking. No questions had been asked, not out loud anyway. But Wes knew small towns didn't run on truth. They ran on observation implication and whispers sharp enough to draw blood. As they rolled into town, he saw it happen like clockwork. Mrs. Patch, the seamstress, paused mid-step on her shop porch, hand frozen in the air with her yardstick still raised. She squinted, then turned inside and closed the door. Down the block, old Mr. Hadley adjusted his spectacles and muttered something to his nephew. They both stared. The girls didn't flinch, but Wes could feel the tension in Hetty's shoulders beside him. At the general store, he pulled the wagon to a stop and dismounted. He tied the reins with care, pretending he didn't feel every eye on his back. "Stay here," he told the girls. "I won't be long." He disappeared inside the bell above the door, jingling once. From the window, Hattie watched a woman whisper to another near the post office steps. One of them pointed not subtly. Hetty kept her gaze straight ahead. Inside, Wes approached the counter, where Ed Drummond, the store owner, was stacking tins of peaches. Ed glanced up and gave a slow nod. "Wes," he said, "need flour, salt, Some sugar if you've got it. Ed hesitated. For baking. Trying something new, Wes replied flatly. You've got guests. There it was. The edge in the voice, the baited line. Wes met his eyes evenly. For now. Ed didn't ask more, but his hands moved slower than usual. When he passed the paper-wrapped bundle across the counter, he lowered his voice. Folks are wondering. Wes took the parcel. They usually are. As he turned to leave, he caught the faint reflection of Mrs. Patch, watching from across the street. Her lips were tight eyes, narrowed, measuring something she didn't yet understand. Outside, he handed the bundle up to Hetty. She held it on her lap with both hands. They didn't speak until they had left the town limits. Why do people look like that? Hattie asked quietly. Wes flicked the reins jaw tight. They don't know you. Hetty turned her head. They think they do. He glanced at her. Her voice was calm, but her eyes said more. Said she'd lived through being misunderstood. Judged. Assumed. He didn't reply, but he reached out and rested his hand lightly on hers for just a moment before taking the reins again. Back at the ranch, the girls helped unload the supplies. Hetty carried the flour inside like it was a precious thing. Hattie followed her stuffed puppy tucked under one arm, her fingers trailing the wooden frame of the doorway as she passed. In the kitchen, Wes placed a fresh stick of butter on the counter, then looked around at the space, as if seeing it for the first time. "Ever make cornbread?" he asked. "No," Hetty said, pulling her sleeves up. "But I watch real good." He handed her the mixing bowl. Hattie climbed onto the bench and watched with wide eyes. They moved in quiet rhythm. Measure, pour, stir. She spilled the flour. He didn't scold. When the batter was ready, he handed her the cast-iron skillet. "You pour. I'll handle the heat." She nodded and did exactly that. While it baked, the scent of warm bread filled the air. Hattie giggled when the dog sneezed from the flour dust. Even Wes smiled just barely, but it was real. The bread turned out dry and dense, but no one complained. They ate every last bite. After dinner, Hattie asked, "Will Mama know where we are?" Wes looked at the fire, then at the girls. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But if she's out there somewhere, I think she'd be glad you're safe." She liked barns, Hetty said suddenly. She always said they smelled like work and kindness. Wes didn't reply. He just leaned back in his chair and listened. That night, as the wind rose outside and the house settled into silence, Hetty lay awake on the rug staring at the drawing she'd hung earlier. "You still think we're leaving?" Hattie asked beside her. "I think. If he was going to send us away, he already would have. But he hasn't said we can stay." Hetty was quiet a long time. Then she whispered, "Maybe he's waiting to see if we belong." Hattie turned over and curled into her sister's side. "Then we'll show him." Upstairs, Wes stood by the window. In his hand was a piece of paper from the general store, a note written in Mrs. Patch's tidy script, slipped discreetly into his bag. "The preacher's wife believes the Burkes are still interested in adopting. They have room, they have support, and they're asking about the girls. Town council may become involved." He crumpled it in his hand. The fire crackled. The wind hummed through the eaves. Downstairs, 2 girls slept under an old quilt. A dog curled between them, and for the first time in years, Wes felt the weight of not just having people under his roof, but the burden and blessing of being the reason they stayed. The morning sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting thin rays of gold through the frost-laced windows of the Holt Ranch. Inside, the fire had burned low, its embers glowing soft in the hearth, but the warmth lingered not just from the wood, but from something else growing inside the walls of the old house. Hetty was already awake when Wes came down the stairs. She sat at the table, legs swinging beneath the bench, staring at a stub of charcoal in her fingers. The dog rested at her feet, tail thumping twice at the sight of him. "Sleep all right?" Wes asked. She nodded. Your stairs creak." He smirked faintly. "So do my knees." She didn't laugh, but her mouth curved just slightly, the closest she came to smiling that early in the day. He walked to the stove, set the kettle on, and reached for the loaf of yesterday's cornbread. It was stale, but passable with a little butter and heat. By the time Hattie padded into the room, hair askew and rubbing her eyes, Wes had set out 3 tin plates. The girls ate quietly the way they always did, but there was a comfort to it now. Not tension, just a rhythm, like they were all still learning the sound of breakfast. After they'd finished, Hetty stood and retrieved a folded sheet of butcher paper from her small pack. She laid it out carefully on the table, smoothing the edges. "What's that?" Wes asked. "A picture," she said. "Not done yet." He didn't press. Instead, he moved toward the fireplace, checking the embers. "You girls ever chop wood?" Hattie blinked. "We're 6. He paused. "Right. But we can carry kindling," Hetty added. "And we can watch how you chop." Wes chuckled, and for a moment he forgot the letter crumpled in his coat pocket, the one hinting that people were watching, waiting for him to fail. They spent the morning outside. The snow had thinned, but left a slick sheen on the barn's tin roof. Wes chopped slow, clean swings, while the girls gathered sticks and pine cones from the yard's edge. The old dog followed them like a limp-legged guardian tail, wagging never far. At one point, Hetty stopped and looked up at the sky. "You think the clouds ever get tired of moving?" Wes paused mid-swing. "Maybe, but they keep moving anyway." She nodded solemnly and went back to collecting. After lunch, while Hattie napped on the rug, Hetty returned to the butcher paper. She worked slowly, intentionally. Wes busied himself with fixing the loose drawer in the kitchen, but his eyes kept drifting back to the table. She drew with short, deliberate strokes, the way someone works when they've learned that mistakes matter. The image was of the porch, 2 pairs of boots side by side, hers small and scruffed, his weather-worn and broad. The dog's tail peeked in at the corner, wagging. When she finished, she folded the drawing gently and held it in her lap, waiting. Wes noticed. "Something wrong with it?" "No," she said. "But it's not a picture if it just sits there." He raised an eyebrow. "What's it supposed to do, then?" "Hang," she said. "Like the one I made before. So people see it and remember." He stared at her, unsure of what words could match that. Eventually, he stood and went to the workshop shelf again. He pulled out a small tack and a hammer. Hetty followed her, drawing pressed flat against her chest. She chose a spot near the stairwell, not too high, not too central. Quiet, but seen. He handed her the hammer. "Want to do the honors?" She nodded and took it from him with both hands, steady as stone. 2 careful taps. Then she stepped back. They both looked at the wall. "That's your second one," he said. She nodded. "You planning on filling all the walls?" She glanced around the house, then met his eyes. "Only the ones that are still empty." Later that afternoon, the sheriff came. The sound of hooves crunching on the road sent Bramble barking and the girls rushing to the window. Wes opened the front door before Wexler could knock. "Sheriff," he said flatly. Wexler removed his hat. "Afternoon." "Halt." Wes said nothing, just stepped aside. Wexler entered, eyes scanning the room. They landed on the 2 girls standing just beside the fireplace. "Ladies," he said, offering a tight nod. They didn't answer, but Hattie moved behind Hetty, rabbit in hand. "I won't take long," Wexler added. "Just doing my rounds." "You ever do rounds before?" Wes asked, tone sharp. "Not like this." Wes didn't offer him coffee, didn't invite him to sit. Wexler sighed. "Look, I'm not here to make trouble. But there's been some chatter. People wondering what you're doing, keeping 2 girls here without any papers. No plan. Council's asking questions. I'm feeding them, keeping them warm. That's the plan. They're not yours, Wes." He looked at the drawing on the wall, then at the 2 pairs of boots by the door, then finally back at the sheriff. "They didn't ask to be," he said quietly. "But they're here." Wexler's voice softened. "The Burkes are still offering. They want something pretty to hold up in church," Wes said. "Something that won't talk too much or draw on walls." The sheriff didn't deny it. "Well," he muttered, placing his hat back on his head, "just be ready. If this goes to a vote, it could get loud." Wes's jaw tightened. "Let it." After the sheriff left, the girls sat on the bottom stair. Hattie whispered, "Are we leaving?" Knelt in front of them. "You're still here, aren't you?" Hetty met his gaze. "But are we staying?" He hesitated, and, in that silence, the old house felt like it was listening too, like it had waited years to know what kind of home it wanted to be. Wes finally said, "I don't know yet." Hetty nodded once. "Then I'll draw another picture tomorrow, just in case," and she went back to the table. The wind carried the scent of pine, and something else, an uneasiness Wes couldn't quite name. He stood on the porch early that morning, mug in hand, watching a thin line of dust rise on the far end of the road. It wasn't the mail wagon. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a black carriage, polished and far too clean for country roads, the kind of carriage used on Sundays and funerals. Wes felt his jaw tighten. The Burkes had come. Inside, Hetty and Hattie were colouring with blunt pencils at the kitchen table, a bowl of blackberries between them. Bramble snoozed in the corner, one ear twitching with every new creak of the porch. The house smelled faintly of cornbread and ash, home or something becoming it. Wes set his mug down. "Stay here," he said, and stepped outside before the carriage came to a full stop. The door opened, and Elsie Burke descended with a precision born of showmanship. Her coat was pale blue, pressed, and spotless. Her gloves matched. Her husband Grady followed behind face-solemn hands tucked into the lapels of his long wool coat. They looked like they belonged to a world made of polished floors and closed doors. Mr. Holt Elsie said, her voice all sugar and judgment, "We thought we might save the preacher's wife the trouble." Wes said nothing. "We've heard," she went on, "that you've had 2 little girls here under your roof for nearly a week. Is that correct?" "You didn't come out here to verify rumors," Wes said. "You came because you want to take them." Grady cleared his throat. "We have the means, a proper home, a room already set aside, curtains and all." "They're not curtains," Wes replied evenly. "They're people." Elsie's smile thinned. "They're children. They need guidance, discipline, stability. Surely even you can agree on that." Behind him the door creaked open. He turned to see Hetty standing in the entryway, silent, her small hands gripping the edge of the frame. Her boots were off again, placed neatly by the rug. Her eyes weren't fearful. They were unreadable, a mix of guarded calculation and something far older than her age. "She's delicate," Elsie said with a faint gasp. "Poor thing. You must be exhausted, sweetheart. We've brought peppermint sticks and lace ribbons." "She's not going with you," Wes said, stepping to the side but not out of the way. Elsie raised an eyebrow. "You're keeping both." "I'm not keeping anyone. They chose to stay." Grady stepped forward. "You're a single man, Holt, with no formal guardianship. This isn't pride, it's legality. They're not livestock. They don't need to be claimed." Elsie's eyes narrowed. "You'll break your heart over this Wes Dalton, just like before." The air went still. Wes's hand clenched at his side, but he didn't speak. Hetty did. She stepped out onto the porch, her bare feet quiet on the planks. In her right hand, she held the red marble, smooth, flickering with sunlight. In her left, her stuffed dog, its ears threadbare. "I'm not delicate," she said plainly. Elsie blinked. "I don't want lace ribbons. I want warm mornings. I want him to make the fire before I wake up. I want to draw things and hang them on the wall. That's all." The Burkes stared. Grady opened his mouth, then closed it. Wes looked down at her. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "You want to go with them?" She shook her head once. "Say it," he said gently. "I want to stay." Elsie stepped back as though struck. "This is ridiculous. She's a child. She doesn't know what she wants." "I think she does," Wes said. "And she just told you." Grady took Elsie by the elbow. "Let's go." "But we'll bring paperwork next time," Grady muttered. They descended the steps, their boots crisp on the gravel. As the carriage pulled away, Hattie emerged beside her sister, blinking into the wind. "Who were they?" she asked. "No one that matters," Hetty replied, and dropped the marble into Wes's open palm. That afternoon the wind shifted. It came softer, curling around the eaves like an old memory. Inside, Wes found Hetty folding blankets at the foot of the rug. She paused when she saw him. "Did I mess it up?" she asked. "Saying I want to stay?" "No," he said. "You said what mattered." She nodded. "Then I don't want to be a problem." "You're not." "But you're mad." "I'm tired," he admitted. "Tired of people thinking they know what's best when they don't ask the ones it matters to." She sat down on the rug, her shoulders small and square. "You ever get picked?" she asked. He blinked. "Picked for anything? Like someone choosing you first?" Wes swallowed. "No, not even once." She looked at him, brow furrowed. "I pick you." The words landed softly. No fanfare. Just truth, quiet and solid. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling long after the fire had gone low, the red marble resting on the sill catching the moonlight. Downstairs he heard the soft rustle of the girls shifting beneath their blanket. Bramble snored once. He rose quietly and opened the old door to the spare room, just a storage place now full of cracked crates and broken things. He stood in the doorway a long time, then stepped inside. The spare room hadn't been opened in years. Dust floated in the sunlight like forgotten prayers. The floorboards creaked beneath Wes's boots as he stepped inside. Boxes lined the walls, old tack retired tools, a broken rocking chair that had once sat in a nursery that never came to be. A shelf leaned sideways near the window, its only occupant a faded book about wildflowers in Wyoming. He stared at the space a long while, his breath misting faintly in the cold air. The window latch was rusted shut. The curtain was ripped, yellowed with time. But the light still reached in like it belonged there. He got to work. By late morning the hammering had drawn both girls to the hallway. "Can we see?" Hattie asked, tugging Hetty by the hand. "No," Hetty whispered. "Not yet." Downstairs, Wes was cutting fresh fabric for a curtain. He wasn't much of a tailor, but he knew how to measure, how to fold corners. Right? How to keep his fingers moving when his heart didn't know what to do. The girls helped where they could, stacking books, fetching rags, passing nails. It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone had let them do in a long time. By noon, the room had changed. The chair was mended. The curtain hung straight. The window opened now, letting in a soft breeze scented with cedar and last night's smoke. On the far wall above the bed frame he'd built from leftover boards, he hung Hetty's drawing, the one with the boots, and Bramble's tail. It didn't look like much, but it looked like hers. When he finally opened the door, Hetty stepped inside, then stopped cold. "This for us?" she asked. "It's a room," he said. Simply. Hattie drifted to the window, fingers tracing the sill. "It smells like outside." Hetty walked over to the bed, ran her hand over the quilt. "You folded it real good." He scratched the back of his neck. Didn't want it wrinkled. She set her rabbit on the pillow, then turned to face him. For a moment she looked as though she might say nothing. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his middle. He froze. Not because he didn't want it, but because he did. Too much. More than he was ready for. Then slowly he bent down and hugged her back. Not tight. Not hard. But enough. The next day the first letter arrived. He found it nailed to the fence post. To Mr. R. Holt, notice of review. Custodial concerns regarding unrelated minors. Date 4 days hence. Location town Chapel Hall. Typed. Stamped. Official. No kindness in it. Just procedure. He folded it and slipped it into his coat pocket. Inside the house, Hetty sat on the porch steps brushing dirt from her boots. The red marble sat beside her. She didn't look up when he passed, but she had seen the letter. He could tell by the stillness in her shoulders, the way her hands moved a little slower than usual. That evening she didn't draw. She cleaned her corner of the room, folded their blankets twice, then went to bed early. Wes sat by the fire long after the girls had gone quiet. He sharpened his knife not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do. When he finally stood, he found a note on the kitchen table. "I like your quiet." Blocky letters, folded once. He didn't sleep much that night. In town the next day the air was thicker. At the general store people fell silent when he entered. They watched, measured, judged. He picked up nails, a sack of flour, and a tin of peppermint for the girls. At the counter, Ed didn't make small talk. "They'll be at the chapel," Ed said. "I figured. You know what people say. Never stopped them before. You're not helping yourself." "I'm not trying to." Outside, he passed the Burkes. Grady tipped his hat. Elsie didn't. Back at the ranch, Hetty was helping Hattie braid her hair. They'd found a ribbon in the drawer, blue with tiny stitched flowers. Wes didn't remember owning it. Maybe Mabel had left it behind. Maybe it had just been waiting. At supper, Hetty asked, "Do I have a last name?" "Yet." Wes paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "I don't know," he said honestly. "If I did," she pressed, "what would it be?" He looked at her a long time. "Names come from belonging, not from blood." She nodded slowly as if weighing the truth in it. Then later that night, she pulled out her drawing and scribbled something in the bottom corner with a blunt pencil. Hetty May Hope. She didn't ask permission. She just claimed it. That night, as the wind picked up and the shutters tapped lightly, Wes stood at the foot of their doorway. He watched them sleep, 2 little girls in a room that used to be silent, now full of breath and warmth and small dreams. He whispered just to the dark, "You're worth it." He didn't realize Hetty had heard until she replied, barely awake, "I know." Then silence again, the kind that didn't weigh heavy anymore, the kind that held promise. The town chapel had never seen so many boots lined along its whitewashed fence. Cars and wagons dotted the gravel lot, neighbors whispering in low tones, some out of pity, others out of curiosity, and a few with sharpened teeth of self-righteousness. Snow flurried in light drifts, not yet thick enough to silence the town's murmurs. Inside, the warmth came from bodies, not belief. The town council sat behind a makeshift table on the raised altar platform, stacks of manila folders and a rusting coffee pot between them. Sheriff Wexler stood near the wall, arms crossed. Grady Burke occupied the front pew, legs crossed, like he'd already won. Elsie sat beside him, eyes locked on the door like a hawk. Wes entered holding both girls' hands. The room hushed. Hetty wore a borrowed dress from the sheriff's, niece sleeves a touch too long. Hattie wore boots too big and clutched her stuffed dog like a lifeline. They walked down the aisle as if they'd rehearsed it. But no one had prepared Wes for this. Mr. Holt said, "Marlene Whitaker, head of the town council, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper expectations. We appreciate your attendance today." "Didn't feel optional," Wes said. Marlene offered a brittle smile. "We'll begin promptly." They started with protocol, custodial law, unregistered minors, improper housing arrangements, no formal guardianship, no church affiliation, no blood ties. Then came the testimonials. Elsie Burke's voice rang with practiced charity. "The girls need structure. We've already prepared a room for them. We can offer piano lessons, Sunday schooling, and fencing to give them refinement." "Fences or fencing," Wes muttered to Wexler under his breath. The sheriff didn't answer. Grady spoke next. "We can raise them properly, and we'll preserve their mother's memory." "You didn't even know her," Wes said aloud. "Neither did you," Elsie snapped. "But I listened when they talked about her," Wes said calmly. "That's more than most did." The room grew still. Then came Hetty. Without prompting, she stepped forward and stood at the center of the chapel's aisle, chin high. "I'd like to speak." Marlene looked startled. "Child, this is a formal review. I know what formal means," Hetty replied. "It means people are deciding things for us without asking." "She's just a child," Elsie cut in. Hetty turned. "Then maybe stop trying to make me act like a puppet." Gasps echoed. "I don't want piano lessons," Hetty continued, voice steady. "I don't want dresses with itchy collars. I don't want to be told to smile when I don't feel like it. I want to wake up and smell coffee and firewood and dog fur and old tools." She turned to the council now. "I want someone who doesn't talk at me, but with me. I want to draw and name things and not feel scared I'll be sent away if I say too much. I want to belong." Marlene shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff Wexler finally stepped forward. "If I may speak." The council nodded. "I've known Wes Dalton since before any of you showed up with your briefcases and hand-wringing. The man doesn't like people, doesn't trust easy. But the day those two girls showed up, something cracked open in him." "Cracked open," Elsie scoffed. "Yeah," Wexler said, glancing at the girls, "like spring breaking through a long, cold winter." He turned to the council. "And in case you forgot, there ain't a law in this town or this state that says love has to be blood-bound." The chapel quieted again. For a long moment no one said anything. Then Hattie, who had not spoken once all morning, whispered up from her seat. "Can I show you something?" Marlene leaned forward. "You may." Hattie walked over to Hetty and took her hand. Together they opened a folded paper, the newest drawing. It was of the ranch house. Smoke curling from the chimney. Two girls on the porch, a man leaning against the doorframe, and in the sky, a tiny swirl of red marble shining like a second sun. They didn't say a word. They just held it up. And slowly something in the room shifted. The council adjourned for 20 minutes. Wes sat with the girls in the back row, knees bouncing, palms damp. The Burkes whispered furiously. Elsie read with quiet rage. Wexler leaned on the windowsill, chewing a toothpick like it might save his soul. Finally, the doors creaked open. Marlene stepped forward. "We've reviewed all testimony," she said. "While we still advise formal guardianship to be pursued through legal means, we find no cause for removal at this time." Wes exhaled. "The girls may remain under Mr. Holt's care pending further review in the spring." It wasn't permanent. But it was something. Outside the wind had changed. The sun broke through just enough to make the snow sparkle. Wes lifted Hattie onto his shoulders. Hetty walked beside him in silence, one mittened hand clutching his sleeve. "I didn't cry," she whispered. "Nope," Wes said. "You didn't." "I almost did. Still counts." She looked up at him. "Do we get a last name now?" He smiled. "You already picked yours, remember?" She grinned. "But if I get one too," Hattie added. "You'll have to earn it," he said, teasing. She pouted. Or he added, "You could just stay long enough and let it find you." She nodded seriously. "I'll stay forever then." And for the first time since that cold night, they showed up on his porch. Wes believed they just might. Winter deepened its grip on the land. Snow covered the pasture in layers of quiet white, muffling the sound of the world. The wind sang low songs through the pine trees, and the fences creaked under the weight of frost and time. Inside the house, the fire was always burning. and for once, West Dalton's home no longer felt like a place where things ended, but where something had begun. The hearing had changed something in all of them. For the first time, Hetty and Hattie allowed themselves to believe that maybe they weren't going to be taken away again. But it also stirred something else in Wes. Memories he'd buried like broken tools in the barn. Regrets that still whispered in the cold hours of the night. He hadn't told them everything. It started when Hetty found the box. She was looking for extra blankets in the loft when she stumbled upon an old trunk beneath a faded tarp. It was locked, but the clasp was rusted and snapped open with a twist of a screwdriver. Inside were photographs, old newspapers, and letters, some tied with ribbon, others never opened, and a single baby blanket, blue and worn at the edges. She didn't say anything at first, just brought it downstairs, set it on the table, and waited. Wes walked in from the barn just as she unwrapped the blanket, his eyes locked on it. His boots froze mid-step. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, voice lower than usual. "In the attic," she said. Was I not supposed to? He stared at her, then at the box, then at the worn edges of that tiny blanket that once held something fragile and whole. He sat down slowly. Hetty watched him for a long moment, then climbed into the chair beside him. "You had a baby," he nodded once. No words. "Boy or girl?" "Boy." She didn't push. Wes ran a hand through his hair like he was searching for air inside his own skull. His name was Thomas. We called him Tommy. He was barely a year old when the fever came through the valley. Hetty's hands went still. Wes continued, but his voice changed. It went somewhere far away, as if the words were memories being pried from behind a locked door. We didn't know how bad it was. Mabel, my wife, she was stronger than most. She kept him warm, fed, held him all night. But when he started coughing, it didn't matter. He went quiet one morning. Just stopped. Hetty reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "What happened to her?" "She never really came back from it," he whispered. "She blamed herself. Said she should have known. Said I should have ridden into town sooner." We stopped talking. Then one day she packed a small bag and left a note. I never saw her again. Silence settled over the table like dust. "That's why you didn't want us here at first," Hetty said gently. "I didn't want to lose again," he admitted. She looked at him with a softness beyond her years. "You're not losing us. You can't know that." "No," she agreed. "But I can promise to stay." And somehow that felt like more than enough. Later that evening, after Hattie fell asleep, curled in a blanket near the fire, Hetty stayed behind, helping Wes mend a cracked floorboard in the hallway. As they worked in companionable quiet, she asked if he were here. How old would Tommy be? Wes didn't hesitate. 12 this past November. Do you think we would have gotten along? He would have loved you, Wes said. He had this wild curiosity, always into everything, never afraid of asking why. Hetty smiled. Sounds familiar. Wes looked at her. "You're not replacing him. I know," she said. "And I'm not trying to." He nodded. But maybe, she added, "we're just helping each other build something new." The hammer paused in his hand. That word, build, sounded like hope again. The next day they took Tommy's box up the hill behind the barn. It was a quiet walk. Even Bramble stayed still, padding along beside them, without chasing any birds or barking at squirrels. They stopped near an old tree, where the roots curled like outstretched fingers, and the snow thinned beneath the branches. Wes dug with slow, careful shovels. Hetty placed the box into the ground, then covered it again with her mittened hands. No ceremony. No speeches. Just a boy finally laid to rest in the company of those who were learning to carry his memory forward instead of locking it away. "I didn't know him," Hetty said quietly, "but I'm glad I know about him now." Wes looked at her, his eyes red, but clear. Me too. They stood a while longer. Then, without saying anything else, they walked back to the house. That night, Hetty drew something new. It was the same house. But this time, there were 4 people. 2 girls. 1 man. 1 small boy in the sky, made of stars. She didn't sign it. She didn't have to. Wes knew exactly who it belonged to. The storm rolled in without warning, thick wet snow pounding the valley, with a force that even the pines bowed to. Winds howled like wolves through the ridgelines. But inside the ranch house, the fire burned steady, the walls held tight, and the laughter of 2 girls echoed like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. Wes was teaching Hetty how to mend a stirrup strap. Her hands, once hesitant and clumsy, now moved with growing confidence. Across the room, Hattie sat at the kitchen table humming as she fed her stuffed dog with a spoonful of invisible soup. It felt like peace. Until the knock. 3 hard raps, not friendly, not uncertain. Wes froze. No one came out this far during a storm unless they meant to bring trouble with them. He rose slowly, nodding for the girls to stay put. The wind caught the door as he opened it, slamming it against the wall. There, silhouetted in a curtain of white, stood Elsie Burke, dressed not in her usual church hat and pearls, but in a practical coat and mud-slick boots. Her expression was cold, determined, and behind her, holding a file folder and a grim expression, was a woman in a grey state-issued coat, one Wes had seen only once before, years ago when a neighbour lost custody of his children. CPS, Child Protective Services. The woman stepped forward, flashing her ID. Mr. Wes Dalton, I'm Agent Keene with Wyoming CPS. We've received a formal request for emergency review regarding the placement of 2 minors under your care. Hetty appeared behind him. What's going on? Stay inside, Wes said gently. Agent Keene glanced down at her clipboard. There's concern about the long-term suitability of this living situation. We'll be conducting an in-home assessment and, if necessary, temporary removal, pending review. No, Hetty said. Agent Keene crouched. Sweetheart, this isn't punishment. It's just protocol. You don't know anything about us, Hetty said, her voice like flint. Elsie stepped forward. We've waited long enough. This charade has gone on too long. Wes looked at her, the calm in his voice now paper-thin. You filed the complaint. I did what's best for them, she snapped. You're a recluse, a man with a past no one knows. What kind of life can 2 young girls have out here, surrounded by dirt and silence? A peaceful one, Wes said. An honest one. Agent Keene held up her hand. Let's not escalate. Mr. Holt, may I come in? Wes stepped aside not because he agreed, but because he knew force would only make it worse. Inside, the warmth of the home pushed back against the cold woman's presence. She scanned the room. Clean dishes, firewood stacked neatly, boots drying by the door, 2 small drawings pinned to the fridge. Hetty followed, her arms crossed. Are you taking us? I haven't made any decisions, Agent Keene said, but I do have questions. They sat at the table. Hattie held Bramble in her lap, whispering secrets into his ears. Agent Keene flipped through papers, asking question after question. Where did the girls sleep? What were they eating? Did they attend school? What medical care had they received? Wes answered each with calm clarity, showing schoolwork Hetty had done with him, canned goods in the pantry, the list of vaccination appointments Sheriff Wexler had helped him schedule. Still, the agent's pen didn't stop moving. Hetty leaned forward. What about what we want? Agent Keene looked up. It's not just about want, sweetie. It should be, Hetty said. We didn't choose to lose Mama, but we should get to choose what feels like home now. There was silence, then a soft voice behind them. She calls us her stars. They turned. Hattie stood beside the hearth, eyes wide and unsure but steady. Mama used to say, "Even when it's dark, I see you shining." But when she died, everything felt like night until Wes made us warm again. Wes swallowed hard. Even Agent Keene paused. Outside the storm began to calm. Snow still fell, but gently now, like someone pulling a blanket over a tired world. Agent Keene closed the folder. "I can't ignore the complaint," she said. "But I also can't ignore what I've seen here." Elsie huffed. "You're making a mistake." "No," Agent Keene replied. Standing. "I'm making a note. Pending review, minors appear emotionally bonded to guardian. Home is safe and stable. Recommend continued placement with oversight." She turned to Weiss. "I'll return in 1 month, with more paperwork, I'm afraid. But for now, they stay." Relief crashed over him like spring water. The girls exhaled together. Elsie stormed out without a word, boots crunching like thunder in the snow. Agent Keene lingered. "For what it's worth," she said, lowering her voice, "not many men would have taken this on. But it's clear, they're not just surviving. They're healing." Wes looked at Hetty and Hattie, curled together on the couch now like roots from the same tree. "Guess I am too," he murmured. That night, as wind whispered low through the eaves, the girls insisted on sleeping near the fire. Wes let them. He even dragged his old armchair beside them just to watch over a little while. But he never made it back to his bed. They all slept there together, wrapped in quilts, hearts steady, the warmth of love holding stronger than any winter storm. Spring thaw came slowly that year, teasing the edges of the fields, with the promise of green, but refusing to let go of the cold. The snow didn't melt, it retreated, inch by inch, as if even winter knew it had overstayed its welcome on the ranch. Inside, life was changing too. Wes stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing dishes, while the girls sat at the kitchen table filling out worksheets. Hetty corrected her own spelling, muttering under her breath. Hattie sang a tuneless song about bumblebees and pancakes, while brambles snored beneath her feet. It had been 2 weeks since Agent Keene's surprise visit. 2 weeks since Elsie Burke had slammed her car door and driven away in a fury of lost control. 2 weeks since Wes had realized just how badly he wanted this to last, not just for the girls, but for himself. And today he'd decided to do something about it. The bell above the post office door jingled. Marlene Whitaker looked up from her ledger, blinking behind thick glasses. "Well, I'll be. If it isn't Wes Dalton. First time in town in, 6 months?" "7, he said, setting a folder gently on the counter. She raised a brow. "This official as it gets." Marlene opened the folder, brows lifting higher with every page. A notarized statement of intent. Letters of reference from Sheriff Wexler, Doc Holler, and even surprisingly Maudie from the feed store. Photographs, lesson logs, a schedule of appointments and therapy referrals, proof of income, proof of property. All signed. The final sheet was handwritten in Wes's blocky, careful print. "I am not the girl's father by blood, but I will be by choice. I want to start the guardianship process," Wes said. Voice firm. Legal. Binding. Marlene looked up at him, something like a smile tugging the corner of her mouth. "You know this isn't going to be quick. I've got time. You know it'll mean background checks, interviews, state inspections. I've got nothing to hide." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll get the wheels turning." That night, he didn't say anything about the paperwork. He wanted to wait until it was real, until it couldn't be taken back. But the girls sensed something. "You're humming," Hetty said suspiciously. Wes froze mid-step. "I am." "You never hum," Hattie added. "Not unless you're fixing something big." He laughed softly. "Maybe I am." 3 days later, the doorbell rang again. This time there was no storm, no clipboard, Just a woman with a familiar jawline and eyes that looked too much like his own. "Mabel," he said. She hadn't aged badly, a little thinner, a little quieter, but the same posture, the same way of standing like she was both ready to leave and desperate to stay. "May I come in?" He opened the door without a word. They sat on the porch while the girls played in the field beyond Hetty, trying to teach Hattie how to throw a lasso and failing spectacularly. Bramble barked encouragement. I saw the guardianship notice posted in town. Mabel said, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Didn't believe it at first. "I didn't expect you to show up," he said honestly. She nodded. "I came to see if it was true." "It is." Another long silence. "I thought after Tommy we were both broken," she said quietly. "But you figured out how to heal." "No," Wes said. "I just stopped hiding." Mabel looked at him, eyes soft. "Are you happy?" He thought about it for a long time. "Some days," he admitted. "More than I ever thought I'd be again." She nodded. "I'm glad. I needed to see for myself." "Why now?" She hesitated. "Because I'm sorry. And because part of me hoped maybe the girls deserved to know who you were before all this." "They know," he said. "They know the best parts." She smiled faintly. "I guess they brought him back out." "They did." Mabel stood then. "I won't stay. But I wanted you to know. You were always more than the man who lost something. You were the man who could still give." He looked at her with nothing but peace in his chest. "Take care, Mabel." She nodded. "You too." And just like that she disappeared back down the drive, leaving only footprints and closure. That evening Wes finally told the girls. He knelt in front of them, pulled out the papers from the folded envelope, and laid them on the table. "I started the process today. It'll take time. But it means when we say you live here, it won't just be in words." Hetty's eyes widened. "You mean, I want to adopt you?" Hattie's jaw dropped. Like real forever," he nodded. "If you want that too." Hetty lunged first, wrapping her arms around his neck with a strength that surprised him. Hattie followed, clinging to his side like a barnacle. "You already were our dad," Hetty whispered. "Now the world will know it too." Wes didn't speak. He couldn't. But as the wind outside rustled the spring branches, he held them both close, and for the first time in years, the man who'd once sworn to live alone knew exactly what it meant to be whole again. The courthouse was smaller than Hetty had imagined. She thought a place that decided the fate of families would be grand and echoing with marble floors and high ceilings. But instead it was simple, clean. Just a few rows of worn wooden benches, a single flag fluttering in the corner, and a judge with kind eyes, who looked more like someone's grandpa than the person who would write their future in ink. Wes sat between the girls, both dressed in their best. Hetty in a navy dress with buttons shaped like stars. Hattie in a light yellow cardigan holding Bramble on her lap, like he was part of the legal team. They weren't nervous. They were ready. So was he. But it didn't stop his hands from sweating as the judge entered and called the room to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marlowe." Everyone stood. And just like that, the final chapter began. The proceedings were brief. Agent Keene had already submitted her final report, a glowing account of the girls' well-being, complete with pictures of snow angels, math tests marked with gold stars, and a drawing of a house with 3 people and a dog under a rainbow. The letters of support were even stronger. Sheriff Wexler had written, "They came here broken. He gave them back their light." Doc Holler had included, "You can't always choose how a family begins, but you sure as hell can choose to keep it." Even Elsie Burke surprisingly had sent a 1-line affidavit. "He gave them what I could, not peace." Judge Marlowe read silently for a moment, then looked up at the trio seated before him. "Miss Hetty, Miss Hattie, I have to ask, do you both wish to be adopted by Mr. Holt? Hetty stood spine straight as a fence post. Yes, sir. With all my heart. Hattie stood next slightly behind her. Can Bramble be adopted too? The courtroom chuckled. Wes wiped a tear. I'll allow him honorary status, the judge said, smiling. Then turned to Wes. And Mr. Holt, do you understand that this decision is permanent? That you are responsible for them in every way, financially, emotionally, legally, from here forward? I do. Then let it be known from this day forward, Hetty and Hattie Bell shall be known as Hetty and Hattie Holt. He brought the gavel down softly, a quiet sound. But in the hearts of the three people holding each other tightly on that bench, it echoed like thunder. Outside, the sky broke open into blue. Wes lifted Hattie onto his shoulders as they walked down the courthouse steps, Hetty skipping ahead like her shoes had wings. Can we have pancakes for dinner? Hattie called from above. Anything you want, kiddo. Wes replied, even with sprinkles, especially with sprinkles. Agent Keene walked beside them, grinning. You did good, Mr. Holt. He nodded, voice rough. They did better. Back at the ranch, the celebration was modest, but perfect. Sheriff Wexler brought over burgers. Maudie from the feed store brought a homemade pie. Doc Holler showed up with 2 fishing rods and a wink. Marlene dropped off a scrapbook labeled Firsts. They lit a bonfire in the yard. Laughter carried into the night. But later, after the guests left, and Bramble curled into a soft snore near the door, and the stars blinked down like quiet witnesses, Hetty and Wes sat on the porch swing under a thin quilt. Do you think she saw it today? Hetty asked. Mama. She nodded. I think she never stopped watching, Wes said. I think every time you laughed or helped your sister, or made room for someone else's pain. She was right there, proud as hell. Hetty was quiet a moment. Then, you didn't have to keep us, you know. I didn't keep you, Wes said softly. You stayed. There's a difference. She looked at him. Why'd you let us in? He smiled, eyes soft with memory, because you knocked. In her room that night, Hetty opened her notebook to a fresh page. She didn't draw the house this time. She drew 2 stars, side by side, and beneath them, a heart that held the initials R.H. Meanwhile, Wes stood outside the girls' door, listening to their soft breathing. He ran a hand along the doorframe, once just wood and nail, now a gate to the best thing that ever happened to him. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered, Thank you for sending them. Then he turned off the hallway, light walked down the stairs and closed the front door to the cold. But inside, the warmth stayed. Because sometimes, forever isn't a promise, it's a choice. One made again and again in quiet moments, with open arms. And Wes Dalton, once a man who believed he'd lost everything, now understood that the truest kind of family isn't built in blood, or birth, or even in law. It's built in the day you open your door. And never let it close again. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Leave a comment below. We read every single one, and it means more than you know. And if stories like this bring you hope, comfort, or just a quiet moment of reflection in your day, consider subscribing to our channel. We're building a community that believes in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of love. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. We're so grateful to have you here. Until next time, stay kind and stay close.